To prepare for the next project, we need to probably step outside to get the paper ready. What you're gonna do is completely blacken in a page of your drawing paper. I recommend just leaving it in the pad. Don't have anything else around, and try to be a little careful so you don't get a lot of charcoal on your subsequent pages below it. You need to use the type of compressed charcoal that I asked you to buy. It's the stuff that comes, it looks like soft pastels or long rectangular bricks. Mine's kind of broken up, but you'll probably go through at least one to do this. So just put it on the page and start laying it down like so. So when you're done, you're probably going to be a little messy. That's fine. You just wash your hands. But carefully pick this up and try to tap off the excess dust. You don't want to get that on top of your other pieces of paper. And then what you're going to want to do is carefully tear this top sheet off from your below pages out of the book. At which point you'll attach that to whatever kind of drawing board you have set up inside, whether it's a real drawing board or a makeshift drawing board. And don't worry if you don't get right to the ends completely. That's not that big a deal. You'll be able to clean that up later after you work it for a little bit. So the next important step of setting up this project is going out and collecting a few large rocks. That's what our subject matter is going to be for this drawing. Luckily, rocks aren't too hard to find. Hopefully you can find some bigger ones. They're just a little bit easier to set up. And I kind of have mine balanced here in a way that's, I don't know, a little Stonehenge-y. It's going to look really monumental on the page, especially when we draw it large. So do that. But also notice, again, with these value drawings, it's really crucial that you're blocking out the excess light. You're either covering windows, working in a darker room, and really controlling the light source. So I have my lamp set up so it's kind of from behind and above the images. And that way I get really interesting shadows coming towards me, and the front of the rocks that I'm looking at just look more interesting. So from my point of view, where I'm going to be drawing from, I'll show you. This is pretty much, sorry, it's out of focus, but what my composition will be. Kind of have an angular, there's an angle to the table and enough room to show the cast shadows, and that really bright rock on top kind of ties it all together against that black background. It's important too, you should probably lay out a white sheet or a white piece of paper for the surface. That way you can see the cast shadows really good, and preferably grab something like a really dark or black colored sheet to put behind them. And that'll be a good setup. To begin this drawing, first off, make sure that you've clipped your black tone paper onto a sturdy surface, whether it's a makeshift board or a drawing board, and clip it into place really good so it doesn't move around. You're going to be erasing pretty vigorously. You're going to use your Staedtler Mars plastic eraser. This will do the majority of the work for you, and you'll want some kind of sighting tool, something that you can use to check distances. Now, I know I said for these value drawings, and this is going to be the case for the value drawings we're going to do in the future too, you want to avoid using contour lines. You don't want big black outlines or white outlines around things to show the edges of the form. All you need is value. It'll make it more realistic. However, to get started, you can sort of rough in the shapes and figure out your composition just by, let's put that a little lower, using your eraser. as a type of like, just to roughen the shapes. Okay, so now that you've blocked in your composition, you figured out how it's going to fit on the page, you've just made some preliminary marks, realize, this stuff's pretty easy to erase simply by just pushing the pigment around. If you need to make some stuff go away or make your lines less obvious, which is probably a good idea, you can just kind of gently rub over them with your fingers and that will lighten those lines. Now what I'm going to do is take my eraser and really try to respond to the brightest things I see. Some of that's going to be the top of this rock, but most definitely the tabletop. And so I'll start cutting that away immediately. And as I do that, these little lines that I've made should just sort of disappear as I get up to the edges. And if not, then, I'll go back and kind of work them. One thing that I've learned with this eraser, maybe at first it might seem like it's a little difficult. I've had people say that in the past. It's totally doable. It's totally easy to erase with. But what you need to do is just be aware that what erases best with this eraser is the frequency in which you move it. If you move it quickly, if you move it around fast, it'll take a lot of stuff off. And occasionally you'll have to kind of clean it off with your thumb. Not a big deal, but just remember that. It's not how hard you push. If you try to sit there and go slow and push hard, you're not going to get anywhere fast. Anyways, I'll go ahead and block in those lights now in time lapse. Okay, so at this point, I've put in pretty much the major lights and darks. I've, kind of determined mostly, the brightest parts of the table. I know it's a little bit crazy, messy right now, but that gets cleaned up as you keep working it. I've also sort of tried to determine some, reflected light, maybe some medium tones. And also I can take a bit of my compressed charcoal, and if I need to reintroduce dark, say if I lose part of the edge of this rock in the edge of this shadow, I can go ahead and put some darks back in, especially at the base where, the shadows sometimes are casting right at the base. You're welcome to use this and or your charcoal pencil as a way to introduce darks back in. There's going to be a little bit of a shadow over here more. There's going to be a little bit of a cast shadow coming down here. And something going on over here. This is just balancing pretty precariously. There's a little bit of a darkness right there. So I've kind of plugged in a couple of areas I know need to be darker. One thing that I want you to notice though, shadows are typically a lot lighter than you think they need to be. If you squint your eyes and try not to think about these rocks being rocks or the shadows being shadows. And you really just look at the tonal values, the ranges. You notice a lot of the times the rocks themselves are going to be darker than the shadows that are being cast on this, white tabletop. There's a lot of light. So these will end up probably getting just continually lightened just by taking a little bit of pigment off at a time until they get the right range. Now, some of this is going to be a matter of you kind of taking a tool like a chamois or a paper towel and sort of pushing this stuff around. Sort of cleaning up the marks and then just going back in and working and reworking areas until it starts taking more and more shape. Okay, I'll go ahead and work on this a little more in time lapse and let you guys see what happens. Okay, so I've kind of refined it a little more, and it definitely needs more work. I only have about a half hour I can work on this, and you guys have a lot more time. So basically what I'm doing now, or what you're going to be doing once you get into a certain point about so far, is refining and working little areas. So you kind of get the major lights and shadows in place, the major shape of the forms, look at little negative spaces, make sure those line up like you see them over there, make sure everything's, like how you want it, and then you have your free reign to keep working, just keep going at it. My suggestion then is to start spot checking little areas. Check this little spot here, see if this shadow, this light, and this underlight all are in about the right range. Squint your eyes and look at the subject matter and then look at your drawing, and you can tell whether or not they're lining up. If one's a little too light, just add a little dark to it. Pick a little bit up off your canvas or your paper, just kind of make it lighter like that. So it still has that glow, but it's not competing with the light that's supposed to be brighter up here. Okay, and then you go around and you do that to everything. Check this little area here. This needs a lot of work. Some area down here, check this. And you just keep refining, cleaning up edges, and just, molding it as you go. Another good spot to look is in the shadows, because oftentimes you're going to see sort of interesting double cast shadows, areas where parts of the shadow might be darker and the other parts that might be lighter. Here's a lighter spot here versus two kind of darker areas here and here that go off in those directions. Here's got a double cast shadow. There's a darker one going this way and a lighter one going this way. So those are all things that you're going to want to look for. Look for double cast shadows, look for areas that you can refine, and the more you see and the more you put on, the more realistic this is going to become. And I think this is the point where these drawings really start to take off in this class. You start to see the potential of what value can do and how much like realism you can get just by shading, essentially. And I think some people really prefer this type of assignment where you erase, because our eyes just tend to naturally respond better to light. We see light and we respond to it. And so when you do, your eraser just instinctively goes to those areas, and those are the areas you work. You hit those lights first, and then everything else is just kind of a gradation of in between. And this is a nice value range to work from, because you have the dark of the background versus the really bright of the tabletop, which you're putting in, and then you know that everything else is going to be some kind of step of value in between those spaces. Okay, so your assignment is to do this and work it until you're just exhausted with it. Like, spend a good 2.5 hours trying to make sure you can do and show everything that you can possibly show with value. It's an exercise in looking, it's an exercise in trying to make yourself see more, and the more you see, the better your drawing is going to look, and the more you convey over here.